Pat, thank you for those kind words. I also owe a real debt to Patrice Mattia, who helped me with PowerPoint. Let's see if that first one comes up. Will the first image come up? No, sorry. Go, there it is. I'm going to begin by showing a few of the pictures by Granacci that belong to the Metropolitan Museum, beginning with the Virgin and Child given in honor of Robert Lehman by Mario Modestini. It's one of 5 versions of the subject. Evidently, the cartoon was reused in the studio, and more versions may come to light. The tiny triptych of the crucifixion, which shows Granacci's almost calligraphic refinement, and also the archaic nature of the picture. He's trying to work in a contemporary mode, but in the format of a Trecento tabernacle. And finally, the Birth of the Virgin, which Francesco Granacci painted during the summer months of 1506 for the wedding of Giovanni di Lorenzo Tornabuoni and Caterina Salviati. This picture was purchased back in 1970, along with a pendant. It's part of a set of pictures that decorated the wedding chamber of Giovanni's rooms in the Palazzo Tornabuoni. Granacci is known to us through the lives of Condivi and Vasari as Michelangelo's, or one of Michelangelo's most intimate friends. Condivi writes, Francesco Granacci, a pupil, by the way, I should say, he is the nude lad kneeling in the foreground here at the age of 11 or 12. And according to Vasari and others, he served as the model. Francesco Granacci, a pupil of Domenico del Ghirlandaio, who perceived the boy's inclination and burning desire and resolved to help him, and he urged him on continually in his undertaking, now providing him with drawings, now taking him along to the master's workshop, or wherever there might be some work of art from which he could benefit. We know that the rules of the Guild of the Arte di Medici e Speciale say that students had to be 14 years old. But Michelangelo was enrolled in the studio by his father at the age of 13. And we also have a record that came to light recently of a payment that Michelangelo, the 12-year-old Michelangelo, carried from the Church of the Innocenti to Santissima Annunziata. And it explains that, or it confirms Vasari's and Condivi's description of his early works. We heard yesterday how he made forgeries, and with the drawings that Granacci was able to crib for him, we know that Michelangelo would smoke them. He would put them over a fire and get them to look like they were older sheets. And then he would give the old sheets back to the owners, and then he would keep the originals. And one of the most famous episodes was the print of St. Anthony by Schongauer, which Granacci supplied and which Michelangelo first copied in ink and then made a painting, which is now in the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, and which was the subject of an exhibition here at the Met last summer. When Michelangelo this is the Innocenti altarpiece, which is dated 1488, which is but Florentine style. It should therefore be before 1489. And it was the period when Michelangelo was in the shop witnessing these pictures being made, as well as the great frescoes in Santa Maria Novella. And what's significant is that Granacci got from this experience as much as he did in imitating the Michelangelesque style of drawings which Carmen described yesterday. The use of flat areas of pigment with no trace of brushwork, typical of the high finish that Ghirlandaio did, is repeated in many of Michelangelo's paintings. Granacci's early works, though, show a different sensibility, and that, I think, is due to his contact with Filippino Lippi in the early 1480s, when he's posed in the nude. And that accounts for the sort of brushy technique that he has. This is one of the early ones, and you can see that even the format of the altarpiece with its saints standing at either side of the Virgin, it's basically a Quattrocento scheme, but carried on into the 16th century. Here, a detail of one of the most beautiful of his works, the Villamagna altarpiece, shows the brushy technique that Granacci had. I often think that he uses a brush with very stiff bristles, and that one sees the brush and there's a kind of feathery quality to the handling. And this contrasts with the solid enamel-like finish that Michelangelo achieves in his paintings, such as you see in the Doni Tondo. Going back to the Ghirlandaio shop, one finds that the successful or the popular compositions were repeated or were copied again and again in the workshop. There are over 24 versions of this tondo, the best one of which is in the Louvre in the Campana collection. And it wasn't until Lisa Venturini and I started studying them that we could see that they were painted in different ways. And some of them, like the Campana picture, is painted, it looks like tempera, it looks like egg tempera. But in a picture such as the one that you see on the screen, in the Kress collection in Birmingham, Alabama, the technique is quite different. The medium is a very oily pigment. And the theory that we've evolved is that this probably dates from after the return of Benedetto Ghirlandaio, one of Domenico's sons, who had spent 6 years in France and adopted the oil technique of painting, or at least he made his pictures look like the oil-based paintings that he would have seen in France. What's significant, though, is that even in Florence, when Benedetto returns and paints several documented works which form the basis for the attribution, he uses a technique of mixing white pigment with colors, rather than the traditional Netherlandish method of using superimposed layers of glazes and giving a kind of transparency. The Florentine, or let's say the Italian technique, which is also used by Lorenzo di Credi and Perugino and the young Raphael, is to mix the white pigment with the colors. One sees the difference in the variations in this composition. This is one which is in the Liechtenstein collection, and you can see that he's eliminated one of the angels, but basically it's the same cartoon. And most recently, this picture was cleaned. This is the painting that's in Cherbourg, and the variations in the handling lead us to suspect that it probably is a very, very early work by Francesco Granacci because of the brushy way that it's been painted and the flimsy proportions of the colonnettes, the addition of the lilies, the facial features point to his handling. And it brings us to the great rest on the flight into Egypt in the National Gallery of Ireland, which, when you see it, stops you in your tracks. The force of its impact is enormous. You have to bear in mind that the picture depicts the Virgin almost in life size. It's well preserved. And many critics over the past 100 years have said that it's actually by Michelangelo. But I think that a careful examination of the picture would lead to a conclusion that it's Granacci working on a drawing or design of Michelangelo's. And here again, there are over 30 different versions of this picture. So it was highly successful and formed the bread and butter of Granacci over a long career. And I should say the versions are smaller than the original. And if you look at the pose of the child with his left leg pulled up and the right leg extending down, you can see that it's a motif borrowed from Ghirlandaio. This is the famous Tornabuoni Tondo in the Uffizi, which is dated 88. Again, the years when Michelangelo and Granacci were working in the studio. And I brought this back in just to show the handling of the paint, the fact that the colors are fused and loose, and not like Michelangelo will do in the unfinished entombment in the National Gallery of London or in the Donitondo. Vasari is rather ambiguous about the role that Michelangelo played in furnishing designs to Granacci. We know throughout his career that other artists painted or made paintings based on Michelangelo's drawings. Pietro d'Argento did the stigmatization of St. Francis in Rome, which is a painting which is now lost. Sebastiano del Piombo used drawings for his great raising of Lazarus, which is now in the National Gallery of London. Any number of artists who were friends of Michelangelo used his ideas. Even late in Michelangelo's career, he's reported to have made drawings on the wood for Bugiardini for 6 warriors in his enormous painting of the the martyrdom of St. Catherine in the Rucellai Chapel of Santa Maria Novella. And they do look Michelangelesque, but the actual execution is the feeble Bugiardini at work. And in this painting, which is now in the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida, again, life-size figures, a large panel. The iconography it's called the Madonna of the Girdle, or the Madonna della Cintola. The Virgin is ascending into heaven, and she's dropping her belt, which St. Thomas, who doubted that she had risen, accepts. And Vasari says that the beautiful, he calls it the twisted, turning figure of St. Thomas, which does stand out in its pose as being more energetic and dynamic compared to the 4 standing saints, could be by Michelangelo, but he leaves it open. And I wonder myself if Michelangelo didn't give a sketch for this twisting figure, which Granacci then elaborated. In talking about the young Granacci, one has to bear in mind that there is another artist whose works parallel his, and often are confused with his oeuvre. The so-called pseudo-Granacci, who initially was named the master of the Spiridon story of Joseph in the Metropolitan Museum's 1971 Catalogue of Florentine Paintings by Federico Zeri. Over 50 works now are known by this artist, and this is one of the stories of the story of one of the scenes of the story of Joseph in a private collection in Rome. You can see it's episodic. It lacks the coherent structure that Michelangelo or Granacci would give to a group scene. They sort of straggle across the surface. The other attempts to define the early works of Granacci have included many of the pseudo-Granacci's works. And to get a clearer picture of Granacci's work, one has to subtract these pictures and assign them to this prolific painter who executed the landscape background in the high altarpiece of Santa Maria Novella, the Tornabuoni altarpiece. In any number of pictures that he's entwined with the Ghirlandaio. He's in the Ghirlandaio shop. And when the Ghirlandaio, well, I should say Domenico dies in 94, January 94. And the shop completes the work in the Tornabuoni chapel and moves to Pisa, where they undertake enormous frescoes of angels on the tribune, which survive. And the artist, well, Granacci is there receiving payments, as well as a figure called Poggini, and his documented career parallels Granacci's, and it's, though no proof has come to light, it seems highly likely that it is Poggini who did these pictures. I'm going to conclude with a painting that I touched on briefly in an article 2 years ago about the pictures made for the Tornabuoni Salviati camera. This one belongs to the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool, and I don't know if you can tell from where you sit, the landscape, I pressed the purple, yeah. This section is absolutely autographed Francesco Granacci. These figures, with their sort of pouting lips and heavy drapery, are characteristic of the Bugiardini that I mentioned before. And this section is quite different with these, with St. John the Baptist filling his cup with water, which comes from a spring in this rocky cliff-like setting. And it's the same technique that we see in the Metz painting of of St. John the Baptist beholding Christ. And it's also, we witness it as well in a tondo in the Bath collection at Longleat House in Wiltshire. It's a great Elizabethan building with a collection of pictures formed in the 19th century. And this picture is undeniably by the same hand as the other pictures with these rocky settings. I should say, looking at this slide, you get the impression that it's an enormous painting, but in fact, it's quite small. It's only 20 inches in diameter, and that's less than half the size of an ordinary tondo in this period. And there's some by Filippino Lippi and others which are even larger. But the small scale helps to define the sort of very precious quality that the painting has, the incredible detail and the solid application of paint. It's a theme for which we could show several other tondos, the Piero di Cosimo in the Heron Museum. Here is one that I found in the basement of the National Gallery of Athens, which is by Cosimo Rosselli. And you can see that they have the figures in a kind of wilderness setting. In Cosimo Rosselli's, the figure is rather stiff, upright, standing, and the background shows these outcroppings of boulders and bodies of water. But it cannot compare with the quality of the Longleat St. Jerome, which I would say must be included in the corpus of the pictures which I grouped as the early Michelangelo. Thank you.